Hey, gorgeous souls, and welcome to the Midlife Purpose Project. I'm your host, Katie Farinas, a yoga teacher and soul purpose coach. And just like you, I'm navigating the wild, beautiful, and sometimes messy terrain of midlife. This is the space where we unpack the shifts happening in our bodies, minds, and souls. We're diving deep into the questions that rise up when everything seems to be changing. Think of this as your toolkit for making sense of this powerful phase of life. We'll have honest conversations, belly laughs, maybe a few tears, and a whole lot of growth. We'll hear from experts on topics that matter to you in midlife, and I'll share yogic philosophy that has been helping humans live with more skill and ease for centuries. Because here's the truth. Everything you've been through, every challenge, every joy, every heartbreak, has been training you for this. You're not broken, you're not lost, you're stepping into your power. So come on in, embrace the mess, the beauty, and the absolute magic of midlife. Let's journey together. Hi, friends, and welcome back to the show. Before we dive in, I want to invite you to sign up for my weekly newsletter. It's where I share personal stories, free tools, soulful reflections. I give journal prompts, mindfulness exercises, grounding tools, all kinds of little tidbits to help you in this midlife transition to come back home to yourself, to your intuition, to your purpose, and to a sense of deep meaning and connection and peace. It's free, it's heartfelt, and it's made for women just like you. So if you would like that, sign up at katiefarinas.com or use the link in the show notes. Now, today we have Stacey Uhrig back with us. This is probably Stacey's third or fourth time on this show. She's fantastic. She is a trauma recovery coach, and we are discussing the book written by Mel Robbins called The Let Them Theory. You've likely heard of the book. It's really taken the world by storm in this past year, but in case you haven't, it's about learning how to let go of control, of trying to control other people and outcomes in our lives so that we can live a more peaceful existence. But Stacey, from a trauma-informed perspective, felt like the book was missing something. She felt like this is not just a mindset shift that we need to make. And she really, this concept that it was more than just a mindset shift was cemented for her when she started doing book clubs on the specific book and asking people, what does it feel like when you even think about letting go of control and trying not to control the people in your lives or control the outcomes of things, of not being a perfectionist. And many people said they felt extremely dysregulated, sick to their stomach, ready to vomit, ready to panic. There's a real visceral reaction that happens when they even consider the idea of letting go. And so what Stacey wants to do is help people to understand why they're having that reaction, and that you're not broken and you shouldn't feel shame about that, and that you actually can do it, but you have to do this missing inner work that we're going to talk about on this episode. So if that's you, if you're feeling like you'd really love to let people and situations be out of your control so that you can feel less anxiety and stress and more peace in your life, but you just feel like you can't for some reason, then listen to this episode. Stacey's going to give you a lot of wisdom on this topic. We do talk about something called internal family systems, which is it's a type of therapy that's used. And I have a show on that as well. So if you want to dive deeper into the concept of internal family systems, I will link that show in the show notes. All right, have a great listen. And as always, I love your comments, your emails, your DMs. So keep them coming. I want to know what you think. All right, Stacey, welcome back to the show. You are my number one most repeated guest. I think this is number 3 or number 4. I can't remember.
Yeah, it's one of those. I
One
think
of
it's number
those.
3.
Yes. And we're discussing how you can come back again.
Yep.
I love getting to spend this time with you and having these conversations and you sharing all of your wisdom. So thank you for being gracious to come back again.
I love the conversations.
I do too. I look forward to them whenever I see you on my calendar coming up. I'm like, ooh, Stacey interview. This is going to be fun.
Awesome.
So today we are going to talk about the Let Them theory, written by Mel Robbins, recently released. I don't know the exact release date, but it was in this, past calendar year. And it has really blown up. It has taken the world by storm. So I'm excited to talk about it and get into a little more of the nitty-gritty of this book.
Me too.
So the basic concept of the book, as best as I understand it, is that we can live a more peaceful, harmonious, and empowered life if we can learn to let go of what other people think of us, let go of trying to control other people and getting people to do what we want them to do, let go of judging other people's decisions about what they're doing, and more turn all that around and to like all that energy we're using to do all of those things, turn it back on ourselves to do the self-improvement work that can lead to all those things I mentioned, more harmony, peace, joy, evolution. So do I have that right? Is that a good summation?
So the whole concept is let them, right? Let them do all the things that you just described. And then the second half is, and while I'm doing that, let me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's where people struggle the most. You and I were talking offline before we started. I have partnered up with a local store, actually, in one of these beautiful little enclave towns that I live near called Bernardsville, New Jersey. The store's called the Rebecca Collection. They're so good about bringing like really insightful things into the community and doing things for the community. And we decided to partner up and do a series of book discussions.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought we would just do the let them theory once, and we've done it 5 times.
Oh my gosh.
4 different dates, 2 times on one particular date. And the reason why is because it's gaining a lot of traction. So good for Mel Robbins' PR team, right? Like it's gained a lot of insight, a lot of traction, a lot of publicity. What I find interesting about the book, and I've done a lot of articles about this and other podcasts on it, is when I start these book discussions, I open it up with this idea of, here's the premise of the book. How many people are having a hard time with this? And easily 50% raise their hand. And what I talk about is the idea is great. It's a great concept. And when I read the book, as someone, I'm 53 years old, as someone that's been in and out of therapy since I was 15, I can do this. And this is what I've come to. And when I work with my clients in my sessions one-to-one, this is something we work towards. Some people are closer to it than others. But my personal assessment is this is not a mindset shift. This is a nervous system shift. When we think about giving up control, and I ask people in these moderations, how many people feel a visceral reaction? They feel sick to their stomach. They feel like they want to throw up. They get a panic attack or an anxiety attack. So their vagus nerve is completely hijacked when they even think about not controlling an outcome, and all the hands go up.
Yeah.
That's a nervous system reaction. So what we really dive into, and what I'm excited to talk about today, is why does it feel so dysregulating and so uncomfortable to let go?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. That's a root cause question.
It's the root cause. And what I say is, and my biggest concern, and I actually sent Mel Robbins an email about this. I do not ever expect that I'll get a response, but I said to her, as a survival mechanism from a trauma-trained lens, reading the book, it's very clear to me that when we grow up environments where things may not feel stable, predictable, certain, which feels unsafe to the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And we are able in an instant to control a particular outcome and it sticks. It's like cause and effect. So that becomes rooted as a go-to survival mechanism. And it doesn't have to be aggression, abuse, violence. This can be just a mist of dysfunction, which
Mm-hmm.
we've talked about before. When that becomes your coping strategy,
Yeah.
and it helps you meet certain needs for safety, security, love, and belonging,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, even if it's physiological needs, you're not going to let go of that.
Right.
And so your body keeps that score, right? So even if you're 40, 50, 60, more or older, younger, but you learn that in your early years, that's just a part of your method of operation.
Yeah.
Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so now we're asking ourselves to completely rewire our nervous system to question whether or not I really have control over an outcome.
Yeah.
That's a very big concept. So, what I say to the people who read this book, my biggest concern is that people are going to read this book, know they have this visceral reaction, and then feel a sense of shame because it's getting so much accolade and this is so great and everybody should just let them, and they can't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid that it's going to create this internal dialogue of, you see, I'm just so broken
Yeah.
that I can't. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
concerned that it creates an opportunity for some deep shame and some deep resentment within themselves and more disconnection from self. And that's not her intention, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But you can't make this book a trauma-focused book if you're not a trauma specialist or you're not bringing trauma specialists into the fold, which she didn't do.
Yeah.
So it would have been just a completely different book, right?
Right. Right.
So I just try to make sure that when people are reading the book, and this is why I like this opportunity, is I don't want people to read this book and say, oh my God, I can't do this. And so therefore I'm further broken. It's just a data point. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
data point of, wow, this is hard for me. Everyone can do it. I had people in these book discussions saying, I can't do it. I'm like, no, you can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that there's a gap here and there's a level of work that needs to be done in order to not worry about what other people think, in order to not have this immediate reaction to people please, in order to learn how to comfortably set a boundary and prioritize yourself.
Yeah.
That's the biggest challenge with the book, this let me piece, which is actually the most poignant, powerful piece. I don't want to say specifically as women, but I do feel strongly as women, we've been programmed, conditioned, whatever, to meet the needs of others and deprioritize our own needs.
Yeah, for
Those
sure.
are big things to have to learn how to get comfortable letting go with. This is not just, I'm going to read the book, flip my mindset and be able to do this. This is why do I feel like I want to vomit?
Right.
When I even think about prioritizing myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, I guess I have two questions. One is I think the book does a good job, at least of bringing awareness to the topic because, of that group that you say, how many of you are struggling with this and 50% raise their hand? Is there another percentage who hasn't raised their hand, but then after having the discussion is like, oh, wait, that is me.
You know what happens? And I found it really interesting because it happened in every single session, which people raised their hand and said, wow, so I'm so much more controlling than I realized.
Yeah. It shines the spotlight on it where you're like, oh,
it really does.
Yeah.
And either they got that by reading the book or listening to the book, or they got that from the discussion.
Yeah.
Because they don't realize, because again, it's their MO. Right. And so they don't understand, or maybe they've just labeled themselves as type A and all these different things that we've done over the years. And they start to realize, oh my God, even type A is a coping strategy. Being this perfectionist is a coping strategy.
Yeah.
Trying to meet the needs of others all the time maybe isn't as altruistic as I thought it was. My intention is good.
Right. Right.
But there's actually, you're right. There's a part of me that wants people to like me. And
Hmm.
actually, I do feel burnt out. And actually, I do feel like I'm overextending myself, which
Yeah.
is what we talk about. That's how you kind of, that's that fine line of when we're over giving, are we resentful and burnt out from it?
Hmm.
Or does
Hmm.
it fill our bucket?
Right. Right.
And that's a good indicator that, oh shit, maybe I'm sorry. I don't,
No, no, you can curse. There's a lot of cursing on this show.
I'm sleep deprived, as we discussed before. Um, are we overextending ourselves
Yeah.
with the end result desired again in the nervous system to be a part of? And
Yeah.
that's what comes up a lot. It's, I have this fear of being on the outskirts of the group. I have
Hmm.
this fear of being ostracized. I have this fear of not being included. So just
Hmm.
letting them doesn't feel safe to my nervous system because
Yeah.
we're hardwired for connection.
We are, yeah. We were talking about the Gabby Bernstein book, Self-Help, before we started recording, and I recently read that, and I've been trying to implement some of the exercises in there. And something that came up for me was to be seen, right? There's this part of me that wants to be seen, and I can see it everywhere, right? That this
Yeah.
part of me comes up, and I think that's also what you're talking about, right? I'm fear of not being accepted, included, liked. But there's also this big part of us as just normal humans that want to be seen. And this is, if we can control an outcome and the outcome winds up being good, then we're seen, right? And we're
Well, and
validated.
I think one of the things I've learned in my practice over the years is I created this thing called this if then spiral. I only call it the if then spiral. Nobody else knows what it
Right.
is.
Yeah.
I do this a lot, and we kind of did it in these sessions, for this book club. It's so simple, actually. So I want you to think about this. So you're doing 1,000 things, right? You have your podcast, you're doing yoga, you're a nurse, you have all these things. And then all of a sudden, something comes in from the school. We need people to do Teacher Appreciation Day. And can you bring X? And you're like, I want to be a part of that group. I want people to know I exist. I want to be seen. So yeah, it's no skin off my back to
Hmm.
run and go get cupcakes, but actually it does become skin off of
Yeah.
your back. And it does become just one more thing to have to do, but you do it because you want to be part of this collective,
Yeah.
AKA I want to be seen. I want to be known. I want to be significant. Now,
Right.
one of the things we talked about is in all of these sessions is this evolution of humanity, right? So going way back to like Neanderthal times where we're hunters and gatherers.
Mhm.
And everything in that time was quote unquote unsafe.
Right.
We don't have the kind of shelter structures that we have. Everything really needs to move in this tribal, communal, village type of scenario.
Hmm.
Safety in numbers. You
Hmm.
don't go on your own. You don't stray from the pack
Yep.
because you could be vulnerable and endangered.
Hmm.
Okay. That is rooted in this very primal part of our nervous system. So being a part of a group, belonging to the group it is truly a safety measure.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay.
Hmm.
So this idea of being on the outskirts feels like for many people, I don't want to be over exaggerating, but like a death. It really
Hmm.
feels like a threat to my safety. When I do these if then spirals, it's this idea is if I don't do, if I don't bring the cupcakes, then people won't know that I'm important, or people won't know I'm a part of the thing, or people won't like me, or people
Hmm.
will think I'm not, part of the community. And if they think that, then they may not like me, or they may not engage with me, or they may not ask me again. And if
Hmm.
that happens, then I'm going to be sad. And I'm like, okay, well, you're sad because, and they're like, because I'm not a part of, and you're not a part of because I'm setting a boundary. Okay. And then what happens when you said, I could potentially be alone?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then if you're alone, then what happens? Well, then I'm isolated. And then what happens? Then I don't know where I belong. I don't know what my value is.
Yeah.
And it feels like death.
Yeah.
And I actually had one person in one of the sessions said, my biggest fear is that I'm going to die alone.
Mm.
And so, it's simple, but it's not simple. It's complicated, but it's not.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we are hardwired for this. And it doesn't look like control, but we're really in some way, and not in a negative way, trying to manipulate the outcome of, I need you to know I'm significant. I need you to know I'm important because I feel that I need this collective connection.
Mm-hmm.
Because without it, I'm by myself, and that doesn't feel safe to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes total sense when you think about it, when you stop and think about
But
it.
when you
It doesn't,
break it down,
right. It's almost like the theory, well, I don't know how she presented it. If she presented one before the other, but it's almost as if you need to let me before you can let them, right? You have to do
yes,
the
you
inner
can.
work first.
It's not the way it's presented. It's let them and then let me. But it
Mm-hmm.
really is let me. And I did a podcast episode on my own podcast about this idea of, why it's important. We can't control the energy that people bring into our space, but we must prioritize our nervous system. So
Mm-hmm.
if we go into a scenario already with self-compassion and self-love, quote unquote, with this concept of my nervous system matters, my experience matters primary first,
Mm-hmm.
and the energy you're bringing into my space does not allow my nervous system to be at rest.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, I'm going to let you do whatever it is you do because I can't control that outcome, but I must
Mm-hmm.
set the boundary for me. In a
Yeah.
perfect world, we would do the let me first and
Mm-hmm.
not worry about it, but that's not the logical way that we do it. We
Mm-hmm.
look at a behavior that's happening. She uses, I think part of the reason why the book is just gaining so much traction, her stories are so relevant. People relate to these things. They feel like they understand the readers feel like they are understood and seen and
Mm-hmm.
significant because her examples are so nonchalant. She uses an example of her son's prom. She uses an example of being on a plane and someone's, coughing. And she uses all my husband won't get off not her husband, but a friend's husband just doesn't get off the couch. He's lazy. Maybe he's vaping. Maybe he's just not doing anything. Like
Yeah.
very relatable scenarios that the everyday person can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we just let them be themselves and have their
Yeah.
own lived human experience? And you either love them where they're at
Mm-hmm.
or you don't,
Right.
but you allow them to be who they are. This is basically the premise. Let them be who they are and get curious about why is that a trigger in my nervous system?
Mm-hmm. And
how can I not have that be the case and just let me do what's best for me?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad this conversation turned in this direction because I think that this is really important what we're talking about right now. I can tell you that through yoga and the practice, the actual physical practice of yoga, meditation, breath work, the asana practice, along with the philosophy, by the time I, listened to this book a month ago or 2 months ago, whatever it was, I felt like this totally makes sense to me. And this is actually like what I've been doing for the past 15 years without really realizing what I was
Right.
doing. Um, And it is nervous system regulation, because really that's what yoga is nervous system regulation. And so, but my husband, on the other hand, whole different story. I immediately shared the podcast with him and I was like, you need to listen to this. But where I think that even me, after doing so many years of work on this type of thing, where I still struggle is with people who are closest to me. And so the person coughing on the plane, or the kid who wants to like not go wherever for the prom, or, these kind of everyday examples that you're mentioning, I don't personally struggle. I know a lot of people do, but I also think that even if we get good at kind of letting the outer circle be, it's very hard to let the inner circle be, especially when their behaviors are impacting your life, right? So for example, let's say you have a partner who, spends way too much time on their phone, and they're, not really present because they're spending so much time on their phone. And so now that's impacting your relationship with them. So the question is like, how do we let them be? That's where they are. How do I let them be? Not try to control them when it's directly impacting our relationship. Or something with your kids, right? So something that your kids are doing. It's so funny that you said what you said, but I recently had a discussion with my daughter, who her moods can be really all over the place. And I said, you are responsible for the energy you bring into this space.
100%.
And I will set boundaries around myself when you don't bring the appropriate energy into this space. And Oprah used to have, I think, a sign on her desk that said that,
It's
you were
amazing.
responsible. Yeah. So, I can set that boundary and say, you are responsible, not try to control her mood, but just say to her, you are responsible, and I'm going to place this boundary. But there's still this desire to want to change. You know what I'm saying?
So what I love about that is she does dedicate certain sections of the book to children parenting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she dedicates the whole last, I think, 3 or 4 chapters to relationships, intimate relationships, your partner relationships. And, I think especially in that last, I think it's chapters 15 to 18 or something like that, 18 to 20, I don't know. But the end of the book, where she's dedicating, a good chunk of the book to relationships, it really comes down to, what are your kind of, what's your firm line? Like, what are your non-negotiables?
Mm-hmm.
And what are you willing to endure, quote unquote, because there's more reward than agita.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so what is that kind of line of, I can handle this, but this is a non-negotiable for me? And that's a hard thing for people, because again, we don't want to be alone. Or maybe from a religious perspective, this idea of separating and pulling away from as we evolve as people
Mm-hmm.
is not, well received. But we get to, and I think this is what I see a lot, is when we start dating somebody, let's just use a partner for an example. When we start dating somebody, the relationship requires X.
Mm-hmm.
When we get engaged, it requires Y. When we get married, it requires something else. Throw kids into the mix, it requires something else. And we don't know what that's going to look like when we start dating.
Mm-hmm.
And we also don't necessarily know, unless we've had some very intense conversations ahead of time, of how do you deal with stress? How do you manage an overload of responsibility? Like, we don't ask these things when we're in a courting and dating phase.
Right.
So now all of a sudden we're watching, oh my gosh, this person sticks on their phone as like their defense mechanism. This is a soothe and distract kind of situation. Mm-hmm. Whereas, maybe you go for a walk, or you do yoga, or you want to read a book, or you do these things. And I think it opens up another dialogue of, there's a lot of people who are very codependent. And they want everybody to have the same coping strategy, and they want everybody to be doing the same thing together, because that again feels like safety and security. And that's also what we witnessed, because our parents growing up in the 50s and 60s and 40s, and that's what they witnessed. We do everything together. And I've heard a lot of women say, I love my husband or I love my partner and I don't want to end that relationship, but I also want to have another life outside of it. Like if my partner and spouse doesn't want to travel, but I'm at a position now where I want to travel, let them stay home and let me find people who I can travel with and not have shame and guilt about that. Or I've even seen people, I have a friend that just did this. She has a husband. They raised their family in Charlotte. She's really not a small town person. She wants big city. They're in their 70s. And she's like, I really feel this draw. We love each other, but he's staying in Charlotte and I'm subletting in the city and I'm getting my city fix. And every other weekend, I'm taking a flight back to Charlotte and I'm doing 10 days in New York and 10 days in Charlotte. And some people might see that as alternative, but that is really a let them let me situation. It's let him have his life. Let him be happy and content with kind of more of this status quo situation. And I'm not ready to have status quo. And I love you and respect you and you love and respect me, but I'm going to go live by myself in the city 10 days a month or every 10 days so I can get that fix and I can feel vibrant and I can get that life in and out of me. For some people, that sounds quote unquote alternative, but it's an extreme but good example of this let them let me.
Yeah.
Versus trying to control the outcome and say, you have to come with me because if you don't come with me, it's wrong, or people are going to think we don't have a healthy marriage or whatever it is. And this woman is 70 years old. And I just thought to myself, gosh, good for you. Like this was your dream and you did it.
That's amazing. It's amazing. And so much credit to their relationship, right? Because
absolutely
he's okay with it. This is not causing a lot of turmoil in their relationship. I'm sure it's actually probably making their relationship stronger because she does feel vibrant and alive. And, those 10 days they probably spend together are amazing. And then she goes and she refills her cup again and she comes back. So it's really a testament, I think, to the strength of their relationship.
Yeah. But people have fear.
Yeah.
What are you going to think if I do that? Or what's my community going to think if I do that? And we get to, that's the opportunity for questioning. That's the invitation, right? To say, why does that bother me? Why am I worried about what other people think? How old is that? When did that develop in my nervous system that it felt jarring and dysregulating to me that people don't agree with my decisions?
Right.
What's the scarcity in that?
Right.
Because that's the questioning. That doesn't have to be the case, but we're conditioned for it.
We are. So my daughter and I are doing something, listeners will know my daughter has a lot of health issues. And right now we're doing a nervous system regulating program. And the program has workbooks and things like that. So one of the workbooks we had to do, it was about the polyvagal theory. And it was asking us when we feel like what things will create a sympathetic response in our nervous system. And to try to, kind of identify some of those things that repeatedly come up.
Yeah.
And some of the things that came up for me, that's exactly what I was doing. So so being disrespected was one of them. I have a real sympathetic response to that. Trying to think of some of the other mindset ones. But at any rate, let's use that example of being disrespected. I thought, well, that's interesting. Like, why? Why?
That's the curiosity so required.
Right. So because and I tried to, my daughter and I get together every time there's a module that's completed and we discuss our workbooks together. And so we were talking about it and I said, is it right to be disrespected? No, it's not right. Like, no one should disrespect me. That's not a right behavior, but I'm not responsible for that behavior. I'm responsible for my reaction to that behavior. And why am I so bothered by someone disrespecting me?
Here's the other thing I would dig into is is the sense of disrespect an interpretation of really what's happening or not?
Right.
Meaning, this is where we come to intention and impact. Is the intention of the person to disrespect,
Right.
or is what you're receiving on your end being interpreted as disrespect?
Right.
So I'll give a perfect example. A family member, was going through a situation with her daughter-in-law. And the daughter-in-law had just had a baby. And I think the daughter-in-law was super overwhelmed. And as the mother-in-law and the grandmother, there was this expectation of, I get to be one of the very first people to go and see my grandchildren, right? This is my grandchildren. This is where the ego comes in. And it was funny because I was talking to her and she said to me, this is just so disrespectful. And I said, or she goes, I'm so insulted. This is disrespectful and I'm insulted. And I said to her, do you think that that's the intention? And that really took her off guard.
Yeah.
Because we don't stop to think about that. Or do you think that person's feeling overwhelmed and thinking of a million things, and it's winter time and germs, and I love you, but gosh, I love my child more and I want my child to be healthy. And why does that have to be seen as disrespect or an insult? And why can't we allow other people to have their own opinions and their own way of navigating the world? Now, if it is intentional to disrespect, it's a very different thing. But we get to stop and question, is that intentional? Because rupture and repair really comes from this concept of intention and impact. Because the intention is usually Y, but the impact is X.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And so that's another area to do the work. You're like, being disrespected, dysregulates my nervous system. But what was going on in my life, or maybe I constantly was interpreting something as disrespect. And is this really disrespect or not? And I think the disrespect really comes down to intention. Because some people are bad actors. Some people do have the intention to disrespect, to disrupt your nervous system. It feels like power and control to them. But I think that there's a lot of people where they'd be like, well, that wasn't my intention. And we would say, well, that's just the way I felt. Well, we get to explore. Why do you feel that way?
Yeah. And that's I guess my, point is, like, even if I think most people, it's probably not their intention, let's say that using this disrespect example, most people they're not even thinking about the other person, right? They're thinking about themselves and what they're feeling and going through. And maybe it's coming out in a way that is rude or disrespectful. So I'll give you an example from my own life. I still work as a floor nurse. There is one provider who is routinely rude and demeaning towards me. Do I think that is her intention? I do not. I think that she herself has a very dysregulated nervous system. I think she's often under a lot of pressure and stress. And this is the way it comes out, right? This is how she deals with it or copes with it. Is it right? No, it's not right. No one should speak to another person that way. Is it really about me? And should I be triggered by that? No, I should not. Am I? Yes.
Right. But here's the thing. This is, I have this sign behind me. You can't see it with the mic there, but it's right here. It's this pink sign. And it says, know your truth and trust your knowing. And I developed that saying for a subset of clients that are going through narcissistic abuse, and they're constantly questioning themselves, but it can apply in a lot of different ways. And when you're in a moment like that, where the person's being rude, okay, or they're being unkind with their words, or their attitude is not one to say of collaboration, which we might label as disrespect. We get to then stop and say, I know my truth. I trust what I know about myself. I trust my knowing.
Mhm.
And it's unfortunate that that person's not being, they're not being sensitive to the energy that they're bringing into the space,
Mhm.
but I can't control. So this is the let them, this
Mhm.
small circle, but I can control the boundaries I set.
Mhm.
So the moment I start to hear it, I can have the opportunity to walk away. Or the
Mhm.
moment I start to hear it, I can literally say, please be respectful with the energy that you bring to my space. And I want to share
Mhm.
with you how that's impacting me.
Yeah.
We're afraid to do that. That's
Mhm.
voice of
Absolutely.
choice, which we talk about a lot. But, we have options as ways to protect our nervous system. And it usually comes in the form of some form of a boundary,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
But we get to label it as disrespect. We get to label it as rude, or we can say, well, this is just not the way I would treat somebody. And maybe
Mhm.
they're overwhelmed. And talking about self-help book, being rooted in our self-energy and seeing it from a lens of compassion, we don't have to excuse the behavior.
Mhm. Yes. Yes.
But we can say, wow, they're definitely not great communicators.
Mhm.
I wonder what happened to them that this is the way that they feel is okay to communicate with people. I don't want to be communicated that way. I
Mhm.
can't change the way she's going to communicate, but I can change how I am on the receiving end of that. So either I
Yeah.
remove myself from being on the receiving end of that, or I literally envision myself being completely coated with Teflon and just letting it roll off of me, which is a technique I teach my clients through all the time. But
Yeah.
there's things we can do to protect our space if people are not being, mindful of the energy that they bring to it.
Yeah. And that's, because there's two things here. And I think she talks about in the book, she says, I understand others' perspectives, I think is how she puts it. But
It's compassion,
basically,
right?
yeah, you're like looking at someone else's behavior that maybe you would like to control, right? Because you don't appreciate the behavior and trying to understand what's behind that behavior. Why are they behaving in this way? And what is their intention, to your point?
Right.
And then there is setting a boundary and saying, that is not okay in my space. But there's the third component, which is investigating why that's not okay in your space, right? Why is that
100.
putting you into a sympathetic response, right? I can be detached from something and objectively look at something and say, that's not a right behavior. That's not how you should treat people or something like that, but not be emotionally charged by it. If I'm becoming emotionally charged by it, I think that's an indicator that there's something underneath that. There's a reason why I'm becoming emotionally charged, even though I could objectively say that's a wrong behavior.
Listen, I was in a consult the other day, and this gentleman said to me, I share this story all the time. He's going through a life crisis, but I'll be honest with you, I'm feeling a sense of anxiety while I tell this to you. Okay. I said, can we hold that there? And he said, sure. And I go, what does that mean for you? How do you know? You're telling me it feels anxious for you. How do you know that you're anxious? And he was very confused. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you just utilized a word to describe something that's going on for you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's peel it back outside of the word. How do you know you're anxious? And he's like, well, I feel it in my stomach. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so what I hear you saying is there's a part of your nervous system that is activated right now. And he's like, yeah, and that's when I'm worried about the future. And I'm like, yes. So when you start to think about the future, there's a part of your brain when you're thinking about these things, it's not able to discern between past, present, and future. Everything is just present,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's no this happened in the past or this could potentially happen. If you're serving your mind with this concept, it's going to react as though it's happening right now. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're thinking, I could lose my wealth, or I could lose half of my wealth, or this could be contentious, or whatever it is, Your mind is thinking this is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, your mind's job is to keep you alive. That's your brain's job. And your nervous system and your organs' job is to keep you alive. And this piece of us that gets activated, our vagus nerve, is part of our autonomic nervous system. And it goes from the base of our skull, from this very primal part of our brain, around our throat. It's the vagus means wander. So it's wandering, and it's very long. It goes around our throat, through our heart, through our lungs, through our spleen, through our gut, through into our intestines. It drops into the bottom of our intestines, and things happen. Our blood pressure goes up. Our heart is racing. We feel like we're having a hard time breathing. We feel like our throat is closing. We feel like we're going to vomit or have diarrhea, or our stomach gets into a knot. So you're thinking something, and your body's job is to respond, and vice versa. So what is it that you're thinking? And he's like, I'm thinking about what's the fear of the future, the unknown, the uncertainty. I don't like the ambiguity of this. And I'm like, okay. And so your body's trying to figure out, how can I navigate this? But it needs to activate. It's like, I sense that maybe there's a bear, so I should probably run.
Yeah.
And that was like a huge concept for him. And, this guy's in therapy, and these things don't talk when you're in talk therapy, they're not getting below the head.
Right.
I'm working from the neck to the gut.
Yeah.
And, we really talked a lot about what is that regulation. So for you, if your sympathetic nervous system is engaged, so for people that don't understand what that is, we'll break it down. Sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight, right? So when someone is, I'm putting in quotes, disrespecting you, you get a sensation of fight or flight in your nervous system. So where do you get that, Katie? Where does it
For
happen?
me personally, my heart starts beating really
Right.
hard and fast. I get a nervous energy in my chest and in my gut. And actually, my whole body starts feeling like it's charged.
Yeah, I always say I feel like I have an nacella train running through my chest. It's like a rumble. I feel like if somebody could touch my chest, it would be like, right? So being charged, that's a great way to describe it. So that's an indicator. There's all of this is about a perceived or real threat. So we get curious of, what other time in my life did somebody bring this level of energy into my space that left me feeling unsafe, and my body's perceiving this as the same?
Yeah.
That is your sympathetic. Your parasympathetic is when we're not being charged. And when our nervous system is not being charged, we can easily rest and digest. As a practitioner, and we're being thrown like so much terminology, I was like, how am I going to remember which is sympathetic and which is parasympathetic? So I'll give people a tip. I always think of parasympathetic starting with P. And I think, okay, parasympathetic is peace in your nervous sympathetic, in your nervous system, where sympathetic is this. Now I know sympathetic's your fight or flight. Right. Parasympathetic is rest and digest. And that's when we're in a peaceful state. So, when I'm working with my clients and getting back to the let them theory, I've had people come up to me at these book club discussions and say, I couldn't even get through the first 5 pages because I felt so activated. I felt so uncomfortable. I felt so dysregulated. I felt sick to my stomach. I had to close the book.
Wow. Just from reading it.
Just from reading it. Right. So I'm like, okay, no disrespect, but that's great.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
That's great.
Discomfort is good.
Yeah. Because now we get to explore.
Right.
What was it about even just getting through this first chapter that was challenging for me? How old is that in our nervous system? How old is that response? We're not born, we have the sympathetic and parasympathetic, and it's all working, and autonomic and all of these different parts of our nervous system. But there's a time where like a switch is flipped,
Mm-hmm.
where certain things, certain sounds, certain tones, certain smells, certain looks and glances flip the switch. We
Right.
get to get curious about why. It's a big reason why I do the hypnosis, because sometimes it's just so deeply rooted.
Yeah.
The hypnosis is really a great catalyst to get to that.
Right.
But the answer's in the answer to why is in that. When you
Right.
can understand that, and this is what's missing from the book. Like, the book is very simple, it's very relevant, it's very relatable, but it does not go deep. You
Right.
know, and one of the people at the book club who is a therapist said, it's, you know, it's in your back pocket psychology. Like, this is not, you know, deep. And she's not a
Right.
psychologist. She's not a therapist. She's not a mental health practitioner, Mel.
Mm-hmm.
Great, but she's
Right.
not those things.
Right.
So, you know, it really is such a good opportunity for people to get into this wondering, into this curiosity about themselves versus self-judgment. Like, why can't I, from a negative perspective, I must be quote unquote fucked up, versus why can't I, and what happened that is the way my body is perceiving that information.
Right. Yeah. And and I think you're right, like, because people could read the book and be like, okay, all that that just makes total sense, everything she's saying. And yet the next time something happens, boom, there they are, right back where they started. And it's such it's such an automatic response. It happens so fast. And your brain and body just seem to like almost reacts before you can think, right? Like, right,
100%.
there's no space between the trigger and the response. So it was Viktor Frankl, like, it just bam, you
Right.
just react. Maybe later, maybe you might reflect on that and go, uh-oh, that was that was like too much. But then the next time, bam, happens again, right? Trigger response. So how do people start to do this if they've read this book and they're like, this makes total sense, but every time I come up against something like this, I'm right back where I started again, and I feel like such a failure. I feel shame. I feel all of these things. Like, how do they begin to start changing their nervous system, to
I
working
mean,
with their nervous system?
honestly, I think that they should probably start to hire somebody to help them learn how to explore it. I mean, it's complicated, but it's not complicated, right? Like, it's complex what's happening inside your body, but when you can work with somebody that knows it and understands it, and they can sit there and guide you and coach you and give you the knowledge of how your body and nervous system works. Like, this is what was missing in my own journey from age 13 to 33, where I was just literally drowning in activation and drowning in anxiety, and was
Mhm.
basically told it was my birthright. And I came from this long line of people that were anxious,
Mhm.
and you just won the lottery, and here's your Lexapro. And I accepted that. And the
Yeah.
Lexapro worked until it
Right.
didn't, because it wasn't, it was biochemical, yes, but it wasn't and I might have inherited a sensitivity to it, no
Mhm.
question about it. I truly believe in epigenetics.
Mhm.
However, I also had a series of experiences that forced my nervous system to have to be in an assess and an address mode all the time. So it
Yeah.
didn't know it was safe to not be assessing and addressing for threat all the time.
Yeah.
And so once I learned that, and I could start to talk to myself and talk to my nervous system and recognize, what threat is it that you're perceiving, and really stop and listen. This is that self-help
Mhm.
piece from Gabby
Mhm.
Bernstein.
Mhm.
Really
Yeah.
stop and listen, because the body will tell you.
Yeah.
You get to then dialogue with yourself and the parts of yourself and say, that's not happening right now. That was before. That was
Yeah.
that. That's
Right.
not now. We get to create a new system. We need to create a new structure. So to answer your question, the most efficacious way
Mhm.
And the most efficient way, because there's no silver bullet, this is not going to be the quickest way, but the
Mhm.
most efficient way is to work with someone that
Yeah.
understands this so they can teach you.
Yeah.
We spend as trauma care practitioners a lot of time doing what we call psychoeducation,
Mhm.
very different from a therapist who's just sitting and listening and asking, how do you feel
Mhm.
about that? And I do that, of course, but a lot of the times we then pause and say, okay, get your notebook because I'm about to
Mhm.
verbal vomit on you. Like, we now need to talk about what is happening in and around your body
Yeah.
and when did this start? And
Yeah.
let's try to connect with that. And
Mhm.
let's see, how is that relevant and the same to now? I really do believe that working with somebody who understands that is really the person's most sustainable way to find the peace
Mhm.
that it is that they're looking for in their nervous system. And
Yeah.
it's a practice. It's like meditation. It's not going to work. And I tell my clients all the time, you're going to have a couple of weeks where you're like on cloud nine, like this shit's working. I'm listening to Stacey. It's all this stuff is good. And then they're
Mm.
on the Zoom or they're sitting in my office crying, saying, I've just taken 3 steps back. I'm like,
Right.
you haven't taken 3 steps back. This is a practice. We're
Mhm.
learning. There's no
Right.
perfectionism here. This is a messy process. In certain situations, you've been resourced enough to make it work. Well, in this particular situation, it wasn't, but you're aware.
Right. Right. And the awareness is huge.
The
It's,
awareness is
it's
huge.
it's everything because you can't change something you're not aware of. So
That's
the
right.
fact that you're just aware of it is a massive step up in the right
Yep.
direction.
Yep.
Yeah. And I was thinking that just what you were saying, how, so our last episode was on internal family systems or parts work, which I will link in the show notes, but how these two things are so closely related because, you know, if we're becoming activated, if we want to control, we're in a situation that we want to control others' behaviors and we're feeling very activated, there's a part there, right? So there's got to be
No doubt.
a part that is the parts being activated, and then it's showing up as you wanting to
Well, that's
control a
why,
situation or person.
my training is what's known as parts work through a polyvagal lens. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really connecting this visceral reaction inside the nervous system to parts being present.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's great. I love how they come together and how it can
Yeah.
just help make sense of the whole thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to keep you. I think you said you had another 11 o'clock,
I
which
do.
is right now. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Stacey, for being here. I really appreciate it. And I will put all your information as always in the show notes and link that other episode that we did. And hopefully we'll have another conversation soon.
It is literally always a pleasure. I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours.
So could I. I love it so much. And next time we talk, I'll have to tell you about this program my daughter and are doing because I would love to hear your
Fantastic.
thoughts on it. All right. Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye. I think that we covered a lot during that discussion. We talked about, why we have this need to control and our fear of not fitting in, being left alone, not being seen, and how our nervous system interprets that and why that brings a sense of fear and urgency to control. We talked about how we can set boundaries, and how boundaries are so important in this process because if we cannot control other people's behaviors or outcomes, and the effort to try is really dysregulating. And so we have to learn how to set boundaries. We also talked about understanding other people's perspectives. So when we're in a situation where another person's behavior is impacting our nervous system, that part of our way of regulating ourselves would be to try to understand, not excuse the behavior and to set the boundary, but also to try to understand why that person is behaving in the way that they are and how it really isn't about us, right? It is really about them. And that understanding, that awareness goes a long way in this process of letting them and letting me or letting yourself. We also talked about emotional detachment. I don't think we use that exact phrase, but when we talked about, understanding someone else's perspective and understanding that it's not about us typically, though, people's intentions are not typically to we use disrespectful as an example, but mean, aggressive, disrespectful, hurtful, you could insert any negative emotion there. It's usually not about us. And so we can learn to emotionally detach from that or change something in our lives that allows us to step away from that situation. And then ultimately, this is about focusing on ourselves and improving ourselves. So I think those were the key takeaways from this episode. I would love for you guys to send me some personal examples. I mentioned some of mine on the episode. I would love to hear some of yours and maybe how your thoughts on that have changed after listening to this episode, or maybe they haven't and you have comments, you have questions. Please send them to me. I will answer anything that I can and anything that I can't. I'm sure Stacey would be happy to answer. So you can, if you're listening through Spotify, you can comment there. If you aren't and you're on Apple or any of the other platforms, then you can send me an email at katie@katiefarinas.com and I will personally answer it. I don't have anyone else answer my emails. They always come from me. So feel free to email me and I will email you back. Okay, so have a wonderful week and we will talk next time.
Thank you for joining me on this journey of self-discovery here at the Midlife Purpose Project. I hope today's conversation sparked something deep inside of you, made you laugh, or reminded you that you are never alone. Remember, it's never too late to reconnect with your soul's purpose and live a life of meaning. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review the show, or share it with someone who could use a little inspiration. It really helps the show reach more women and helps me keep the content ad-free. Join me next time as we continue to explore what it means to live with purpose in midlife.